everyone, this little piece by Soar, which you just heard, is Opus 2, number 1. It's a Minuet in G major, and it's from his 6 divertimentos. The reason why I've chosen this piece to teach is, first of all, I want as many people as possible to learn it. And this piece is not too difficult. It does have perhaps some more intermediate ideas technically, but in general it's not too difficult for most people to learn. And then the other thing that I really love about this piece, and probably the main reason why I chose it, is it has musical ideas in it which are extremely sophisticated and compelling. And when you're studying classical music, you really have to study the musical ideas that are being used. And the musical ideas mean things like counterpoint, or understanding how he uses scales, or how he uses intervals. When we see these common ideas used in Soar, or in Bach, or in Tariga, or whoever it is, what happens is we learn the music much faster. We understand what we're learning very quickly, and which means that we retain it very quickly. Which means also that we know what to tell our fingers what to do very quickly. And our repetitions become far more fruitful because we're knowledgeable about what we're telling our fingers what to do. Okay? So understanding music, some people will ask me sometimes, well, why do I have to understand musical concepts when the notes are written on the page? And my answer to that is the notes are written on the page using specific formulas. There isn't randomness on the page, especially when you're dealing with music from the Renaissance up until the Romantic era. It's not random notes. Those notes are arranged with very specific musical concepts, and if you understand those musical concepts, your learning time and memory retention and just general overall confidence in playing will improve drastically. Drastically is what I've seen, and the reason why I emphasize it so much in my teaching. So let's get to it. We'll talk about the piece, and please follow along with the score if you can, and I'll also put up excerpts from the score as I talk about it. So one of the first things when we look at a piece like this, one of the first things we want to start thinking about is, how is he employing scales? Now, most people, when I tell them, think of this, look for the scales, most people think dee da 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 da. They think scale, this dee da 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 da. They think that kind of scale. Well, I don't see any of those scales in this piece. Well, that's not what I mean. What I mean by scales is the way a scale is constructed is note by note, step to step, right? C to D, or let's use G major since this piece is in G major. G to A is a step away. A to B is a step away. B to C is a step away. C to D is a step away. E, F sharp, G. They're always a step away. Now, what happens in music is composers will use this idea of a scale, the stepwise motion is what we call it, right? They'll use this idea to organize their melodies, and they use scales in various different patterns. But if you're very keen and look for little patterns of scales, you'll find them. In this piece, in the beginning, we see the melody goes G, 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 F sharp, which is a little scale. Very tiny. And then what does he do? A, G. Right? So we have this. D, 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 do, D, 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 do. If we simplify it, it's just, right? Now that doesn't seem like a scale to most people, but in fact, that little pattern is based on a scale. It's based on dee da 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 dee da da da. He could have kept going. Right? So this is a symmetrical tiny little symmetrical scale pattern. Right? And so we look for that. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, now I see how those are connected. I see how one is related to the other. Right? This is incredibly important to start looking for, so that you don't think that the notes are random. These are not random notes. He's using patterns of scales and intervals, and we'll get into that, but he's using patterns, and the sooner you see the patterns, the better off you're going to be. Okay? Now, scales are often thought of as single notes. Dee, dee, da, 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 da. But scales can also be harmonized, and that's what he does after the first 4 bars. So we have the first 4 bars. Here's our scale on top. A, 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 G. Then we have a scale in thirds. So a scale in thirds. What are thirds? Thirds are, the word thirds indicates the distance between one note and another note within a scale. Okay? So to speak. I'm sorry to all the theorists out there who will say, no, it's not exactly that. But yes, I understand. But for simplicity reasons, when we play, for instance, G, and we count up 3, G being the first note in the scale. So G is 1, and we count up 3. G, A, B. So if I harmonize G and B, that's a third. If I put them together, that's a third. They're 3 away, G to B. Now, I can do that with all the notes in the scale. F sharp, because we're in G major, F sharp to A. F sharp, G, A. 3 away. E to G. E, F sharp, G. 3 away. So the whole scale can be harmonized in thirds. Right? You want to know thirds really well. In fact, Sohr in his method, which is, I highly recommend reading it, has a separate section where he talks about thirds and sixths. And thirds are what we just did. Sixths are simply flipping the third. In other words, instead of G and B like this, you could have B in the lower voice. B to G. And then you could have A to F sharp, G, E, F sharp, D, E, C. And the reason why in the method he emphasizes this is because he understood that he had to teach the formulas that he was using. Otherwise, people would think that everything is very random. Now, what's interesting about sixths is in the beginning of the piece, you can see sixths in the first measure. If you look at the middle and the top voice, you have B to G. That's a sixth. Then he does this, which is a D7. We don't need to talk about that right away. The next measure, third measure, notice he has sixths again. C to A. A, B, C. 3 away, put the C in the bass, right? And where does it resolve? B to G again. B lower voice, G higher voice, right? So if we understand our sixths and our thirds well, we look at this piece, oh, okay. I mean, you automatically start seeing the patterns, and it becomes very easy to learn this quickly, which is wonderful to see students suddenly get it. Oh, wow, it's just that. It's not as random as I thought it was. No, it's not. All right, so that's the first thing to start looking at is scales and how these scales work. Now, the other thing that happens in this piece, which is wonderful, because it's an easy piece, and yet he introduces quite a sophisticated idea in this easy piece, and that's what we call counterpoint, contrapuntal motion. In basic terms, counterpoint is when one voice or two voices, or how many voices, doesn't matter, but one voice goes down and the other voice goes up. Right? And it could be the higher voice goes down while the lower voice goes up, or it could be the higher voice goes up while the lower voice goes down. You'll see both of those ideas. They're both counterpoint. We can put them both under the idea of counterpoint. They're countering, right? One goes up, the other is countering and going down. That's all counterpoint means. And you can see that when we get past the scale in thirds. So this is measure 5, measure 6, all thirds. Now notice these thirds and the bass. So the thirds go down. The bass goes up. And how does the bass go up? A little chromatic scale. This is why scales are so important to understand beyond just a technical issue. It's not just a technical thing. It's about the way music is put together. As soon as you start getting that they use that as ways to connect things, your whole outlook on music will change immediately. All right? So now we get into the second section, which is really the interesting part. This is where things get really fascinating to me. Now, if we look at the second section, we notice that in this edition, and probably in the original edition as well, Soar has the D marked with an up stem and a down stem. And that doesn't mean you have to play two Ds there, but he's trying to conceptually make you see that this D is really, in effect, two notes. One is a higher note and one is a lower note. Although it's still one D. It's hard to explain this, but try to imagine that D as being D and like a D here. You don't have to play both, but imagine two Ds put together. Okay, that's what that first note looks like, and that's what he's trying to represent. Notice that the lower stem D goes down in a chromatic scale. We have this D, C sharp, C natural, B, then back up in a normal scale. D, 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 da, da, da. That's the lower voice, right? The middle voice. D, 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 da, da, da. Then the top voice does contrary motion to that, right? Up. D, da, 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 da. D, da, 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 da. And then we put them together. Right? It expands out. You can see in the music it expands and then it contracts. And that's because of the contrary motion. And the contrary motion is based on, both lines are based on scales. Chromatic scale and a non-chromatic scale on the top. But they're both scales. Then in measure 12, he has this, which is even more interesting because what he does on the downbeat of measure 12, he takes the middle voice, which is B, and he splits that. He says, okay, that's B, and I'm going to make that B split apart into B flat and C sharp, and then A and D. So it's another contrary motion. Very odd for Soar, by the way. If you know Soar's music, this is an odd moment. But you can see how he's getting there by just following these rules. So here's 11, measure 11, 12. Very nice. Again, contrary motion, and that gets us into a 3-note chord. Right? Then he does one final contrary motion. A surprise. G7, which is a surprise. Notice that chord has a third in the top of it, right? And then these are common chords: C major, A minor, D7, and finally still D7 for a second, but the bass is resolved to G. And finally resolution to G major. So C major, A minor, D7, and then delayed resolution to G major. Notice the resolution is also contrary motion. The top voice moves up, the middle voice goes down. Very interesting writing for such a simple piece. Actually quite bizarre at times because of all the chromaticism. But we can see how he's putting things together by just following these basic rules, scales and contrary motion. The scale doesn't have to be a G major scale, it can be a chromatic scale, which most people learn again as a technical idea, you know, thinking of it as only a hand position idea. But contrary motion, or scales using contrary motion in this piece, use the chromatic scale. So we don't want to ever think of our scales as just that technical study. What we're studying is the fundamentals of how music is organized. And composers are very good at hiding scales, although if you look closely, you'll see these fragments of scales, these little patterns of scales in the music. And the more you see it, the more you start to see it everywhere. So just let me go through the piece just a little bit in terms of the technique. I'll just talk very quickly about the technique. Most of this lesson was really about the musical understanding, but in case anybody's having problems with the technique, I want to talk about that. Okay? Now, the first thing to understand in the technique is that we have to make sure our fingers are close, that our hand is close. Don't be far away from the guitar. All these chords are going to be very difficult. You got to keep your wrist close and fingers curled. You'll notice my thumb is a little high, no problem. As long as my fingers are close and my wrist is close and this is comfortable, it's fine, okay? And we stay close and we get ready with our second finger, right? And we hold this. And then we go here, notice the sixth, right? And we stretch back for a second and relax onto this tiny little bar. Okay. Now, when I do this sixth, one thing you might notice is the third finger is resting against the second string. And that's because I'm not playing the second string. And so to make this stretch a little bit more comfortable, I let my fingers rest. You see? I stretch back. Very simple. And then I land on the chord very comfortably. Now we have our thirds. And again, keep your fingers close. Most of the thirds down this, or all the thirds down the first and second string is either going to be 2-in-1 or 3-in-1. So keep both of those close. 3's got to stay close, right? 2 should stay close. Stay close to the note, to the strings you're about to play. Then we can slide up, use the first finger as a guide, right? Getting ready. Use 2-in-1 as a guide. And then 3 as a guide. And then finally this chord. If you find this chord difficult, keep your wrist close and move your hand a little bit closer to your fourth string. Push that fourth finger up just a little bit. And that way you can get your hand closer and reach those notes. Okay? Let me play that slowly. You can see my wrist here. Get closer. Right? It's a little bit farther away. Then during this note, I push forward. All right? Now we go on. This, just make sure you're preparing your fingers a little bit for each note. Don't let them fall away. Don't relax your fingers too much, right? Don't just release things. Try to keep your fingers disciplined and over the notes they're about to play as much as you can. Anytime you have guide fingers, here, for example, 2 to 2, use it. 2, 2. Getting ready. Notice my fingers are ready, right? Then finally, we have that big jump. And your fourth finger does need to jump. And just make the previous chord a little short and just jump. Get it ready. Make the shape in the air before you land it as much as you can. There's the shape. Right? And then all of these, get the shape, let it be a little short. get the shape ready. Get the shape ready. And so you don't have to, you can shorten the notes, which is in the style. The minuet style is elegant. You know, it's got a little bit of a leap to it, right? So I lift, prepare, lift, prepare, get the fingers down, down, down. Right? Make sure you're not releasing your fingers, just relaxing them, right? And then, oh, I got to get down. Try, when you release, try to get them immediately starting to feel the next chord in the air. Feel, feel. Right? This is a common problem when people have problems getting from chord to chord. They release their fingers, they relax them, and then they have to contract them for the next chord. Then they release them again, then they have to contract them for the next chord, and they wonder why the chords are so hard. Don't relax your fingers. Don't release and relax your fingers completely. Let them work toward the next chord. Ready, ready, ready. And that's how I would practice it. Take your time in the air and just see, am I ready? Yeah, I'm ready. Now press. Am I ready? Yes. Press. Am I ready? Yes. Okay? It's not particularly difficult, the piece, but if you have trouble with it, these tips should help. Okay? I obviously can't see everybody, but most people have the same problems in terms of learning anything, and particularly with guitar, I see the same problems over and over again. So hopefully these tips will help, and I really hope you'll learn it and appreciate the musical concepts that are in this piece. There's some really great ones, and as you go to the other pieces that you're playing, try to find anything you can. Oh, that's a scale, you know. Or, you know, oh, I see there's thirds here. I see, yeah, if I count between the two, there, you know, it's 3. Interesting, you know. Just start as much as you can becoming interested in this. You will not believe how much more competent you will be playing the instrument and how much better you'll play. This is the big, you know, people have asked me, you know, how do you learn music so fast? The answer is simple. I understand it. If you understand music, you'll learn it quick and you'll retain it very well. I promise. So get interested in this, you know, and hopefully this piece will attract you and get you interested in exploring this more and more. Okay? Good luck, and I look forward to hearing you play it. Please post it and let me know. Okay? Thank you so much.